I knew the exact moment the company was doomed. It wasn't when the stock dipped, and it wasn't when they replaced the breakroom coffee with some organic sludge that tasted like distilled disappointment. It was the moment Jared walked in. Jared was the new CTO, a 28-year-old venture capital experiment wrapped in a fitted vest and smelling like sandalwood and unearned confidence. He walked into the conference room like he was Moses parting the Red Sea, except the Red Sea was just a bunch of tired, middle-aged engineers praying for severance packages. I was sitting in the corner, nursing a styrofoam cup of lukewarm bean water, watching him survey the room. I've been here 6 years. In tech years, that makes me a prehistoric fossil. I'm the ghost in the machine. I'm the reason the servers don't catch fire when Black Friday traffic hits. But to Jared, I was just a woman in a hoodie who looked like she needed a nap and a cigarette. By the way, if you enjoy watching arrogant corporate frat boys get absolutely dismantled by the people they underestimate, do me a solid, hit that subscribe button and upvote this story. It fuels my rage and helps me buy more calming herbal tea, which I definitely lace with whiskey. Thanks, you're the best. Listen up, team, Jared started, clapping his hands together like a seal asking for a fish. I've been reviewing the architecture, and honestly, it's a mess. It's legacy garbage. We're pivoting to a microservices-first, AI-driven ecosystem by Q3. He threw a slide up on the projector. It was a bunch of meaningless circles and arrows that looked like a football play drawn by a toddler on Adderall. I squinted at it. He was proposing deleting the central logic gate of our entire logistics platform. That legacy garbage he was talking about, that was quantum ops. That was my baby. That was the code I wrote during the 2020 logistics nightmare, fueled by panic and insomnia, which literally saved this company from bankruptcy when the rest of the world's supply chains were collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. Excuse me, I said, my voice raspy. I hadn't spoken in a meeting in 3 months. Heads turned. That garbage handles 90% of our vendor compliance. You delete that node and you're not just pivoting, you're lobotomizing the company. Jared turned to me. He had that smile, the one that doesn't reach the eyes, the one practiced in a mirror while listening to Gary Vaynerchuk podcasts. He looked at my messy bun, my faded Nostromo crew t-shirt, and then checked his Apple Watch. And you are? He asked, feigning ignorance. He knew who I was. It was the line item on the budget that the CFO couldn't explain but refused to cut. I'm Emily, I said, keeping it simple. I built the backbone you're trying to surgically remove. Jared chuckled. It was a wet, condescending sound. Right, Emily, look, sweetheart, I appreciate what you did in the old days, but we're not running a history museum here, we're building the future. And frankly, your monolithic code is holding us hostage. We need agility. We need velocity. You don't need whatever this patchwork is. Sweetheart. The word hung in the air like a fart in an elevator. The other engineers looked down at their laptops, terrified. They knew. They knew I wasn't just the architect. They knew I wasn't even technically an employee. But Jared? Jared was too busy admiring his own reflection in the glass whiteboard to do his due diligence. See, back in 2018, when this company was nothing but a chaotic startup with 3 lawsuits and a dream, they couldn't afford me. I was a mercenary developer with a rate that made CFOs weep. So, my lawyer, a shark named Heavy Metal Dave who operates out of a strip mall next to a vape shop, came up with a different arrangement. I didn't sign an employment contract. I signed a licensing agreement. I incorporated my own LLC, Ironclad Logic, and I licensed the Quantum Ops platform to them. Think of it like Adobe or Microsoft. You don't buy the software, you buy the right to use it. And like any landlord renting out a penthouse to a bunch of rowdy college kids, I kept a key. Jared didn't know that. Jared saw a middle-aged woman with dark circles under her eyes and assumed I was a legacy hire, some diversity quota from a bygone era. He thought he was firing a rusted cog. Didn't realize he was trying to evict the landlord while still living in the house. Okay, Jared, I said, leaning back in my chair, the plastic creaking under the weight of my exhaustion. You're the boss. Agility, velocity, got it. Glad we're on the same page, he smirked, turning his back to me to point at his nonsense diagram again. We're going to start sunsetting the old modules effective immediately. HR will be doing some restructuring to align with the new vision. Restructuring, corporate speak for firing the people who actually know how the lights work. I didn't argue. I didn't throw my coffee at him, even though the urge was strong enough to make my hand twitch. I just sat there, watching him pontificate about synergies and bandwidth. My heart wasn't even racing. That's the scary part. When you've been in the trenches this long, you don't panic when the rookie pulls the pin on the grenade. You just check your watch and calculate the blast radius. I looked at the date on my phone. My licensing contract renewed automatically every quarter unless contested. The next payment was due in 4 days. Paragraph 4 of my contract was very specific about what happens if the licensee attempts to modify, reverse engineer, or disparage the integrity of the provided software. And Paragraph 6 was the nuclear option. Jared wrapped up the meeting with a "let's crush it" team and stormed out, likely to go drink a kale smoothie and high-five himself in the mirror. I stayed seated for a moment, finishing my cold coffee. One of the junior devs, a kid named Mike who had trained to not delete production databases, looked over at me with wide eyes. "Emily," he whispered. "Are you okay? He's going to cut you." I crushed the styrofoam cup in my hand and tossed it into the recycling bin with a perfect arc. "Don't worry about me, Mike," I said, standing up and smoothing out my hoodie. "Just do me a favor. If you see me walking out with a box later this week, don't help me carry it. Just go back to your desk and make sure your resume is up to date." I walked back to my cubicle, my leased workspace technically, and logged into my private admin console. Not the company one, the one hosted on a private server in a basement in Estonia that I pay $50 a month for. Jared wanted a revolution. He was about to get a revelation. The freeze-out started subtle, like black mold in a bathroom wall. First, it was the calendar invites. The weekly architecture sync dropped off my Outlook. Then, the strategy alignment meeting. I was sitting in my cubicle, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter coming from the glass-walled conference room 10 feet away. Jared was in there, holding court. Through the glass, I saw him pointing at a whiteboard that I used to own. He was erasing my diagrams, complex, functional flowcharts of data logic, and replacing them with buzzwords like holistic synergy and cloud-native mindset. It's funny how fast you become invisible. 6 years of 80-hour weeks, 6 years of waking up at 3 a.m. to patch a server leak so the CEO could buy his third boat, and suddenly I was a ghost. People I'd had lunch with for years started avoiding eye contact in the hallway. They smelled death on me. In corporate America, getting fired is contagious. If you stand too close to the victim, management might decide you're part of the disease. Then came the new guy. Jared introduced him on Tuesday. "Team, meet Tyler. He's our new product evangelist. He's going to be spearheading the transition to the new stack." Tyler looked like he was 12. He was wearing pristine white sneakers that had never touched a dirty server room floor. He came over to my desk, holding a matcha latte, looking like a puppy who just peed on the rug but thinks he's a good boy. "Hey, Emily, right?" Tyler said, beaming. "Jared told me you're the legacy historian. I'd love to pick your brain about the old code before we deprecate it." Historian? Deprecate. I swiveled my chair around slowly. "Tyler, do you know what a load balancer is?" He blinked. "Well, yeah, concept-wise. We use AWS for that, right? It's all serverless now." "Right," I said, turning back to my screens. "Serverless, because the cloud is just magic sky pixie dust, not actual hardware running in a warehouse in Virginia that melts if you don't optimize your queries." "Good luck, Tyler." He wandered off, looking confused. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. He was walking into a minefield with a map drawn by a narcissist. By Thursday, my access to the staging environment was revoked. I got a generic system email, permissions updated by admin, J. Doe. I didn't fight it. I didn't storm into Jared's office demanding answers. I simply opened my personal laptop, my trusty, beat-up Lenovo that held the keys to the kingdom, and checked the bank account for Ironclad Logic LLC. It was the first of the month. The quarterly licensing fee for the Quantum Ops Core platform was due at midnight. Usually, the old CFO, a guy named Marcus who actually understood how contracts worked, had it on autopay. But Marcus had been restructured last month, too. I refreshed the page, no pending transaction. I refreshed it again an hour later. Nothing. I sat there, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses, feeling a strange mix of adrenaline and calm. It was happening. They were ghosting the payment. In their arrogance, they assumed that since I was sitting in a cubicle collecting a salary, which was actually a retainer fee disguised as payroll for tax simplicity on their end, I didn't need to pay the vendor invoice. They thought they owned me. Therefore, they thought they owned the code. I pulled up the contract. I keep a digital copy, but I also have the original, signed in wet ink by the founder, safe in a fireproof box at home. Clause 3.1, Payment Obligations. Failure to remit licensing fees within 24 hours of the due date constitutes a material breach. Clause 3.2, Cure Period. There is no cure period for willful non-payment or unauthorized modification of the source material. Jared had already violated the unauthorized modification clause by trying to patch his new microservices on top of my core without my API keys. And now, he was about to violate the payment clause. I could have walked into his office. I could have warned him. I could have said, "Hey, Slick, you're about to default on the software that runs your entire inventory system." But then I remembered Sweetheart. I remembered the way he laughed when he said legacy garbage. I remembered the way he looked at me like I was an ugly piece of furniture he couldn't wait to curb, so I let the clock tick. At 4:00 p.m. on Friday, HR sent me a calendar invite for 4:30 p.m. Subject, quick sync. Location, meeting room B. This was it. Friday firing, the classic move. Do it at the end of the day so the employee can't cause a scene and the rest of the staff has the weekend to forget they existed. I started packing, not much. Just a few photos, my lucky screwdriver set, and a succulent that was clinging to life despite the air quality. I wiped my company-issued laptop. I didn't just delete files, I ran a military-grade scrubber on the drive. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I'm a professional and I don't leave fingerprints. I checked the bank account one last time, still zero. I stood up, put on my jacket, and grabbed the manila folder I'd brought from home. Inside was the contract, heavily highlighted in neon yellow. It was time to go to the principal's office. Meeting room B was a glass fishbowl near the elevators, designed so everyone could see your shame as you got the axe. Jared was there, of course, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking like he was posing for a Forbes 30 under 30 cover. Sitting at the table was Brenda from HR. Brenda was a nice lady who communicated exclusively in sad smiles and pamphlets about Cobra insurance. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere else, possibly dead. "Have a seat, Emily," Brenda said, her voice soft, like she was talking to a spooked horse. I sat. I placed my manila folder on the table. Jared eyed it suspiciously, then smirked. He probably thought it was a desperate attempt to show him project charts to save my job. So Jared started, not letting Brenda do her job. "We've been evaluating the team structure. And as we move toward this high-velocity, cloud-native future, we're finding that your skill set doesn't align with the trajectory of quantum ops." "Trajectory," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Like a missile into a mountain?" Jared's jaw tightened. "We're terminating your employment, effective immediately. Brenda has the paperwork, standard severance. 2 weeks' pay, we'll need your badge and laptop." Brenda slid a stack of papers across the table. "We also require you to sign this NDA and non-disparagement agreement to receive the severance," she added, looking at her hands. I didn't touch the papers. I looked at Jared. "Just to be clear," I said, my voice steady, sounding deeper than usual in the small room. "We're terminating our professional relationship. Completely." "That's what fired means, sweetheart," Jared snapped. The mask was slipping. He wanted me out. He wanted my salary budget so he could hire 3 more Tylers. "Okay," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge. I slid it across the table. Then I took the company laptop out of my bag and placed it next to the badge. "There. I'm no longer an employee." "Good," Jared said, pushing off the wall. "Security will escort you out." "Wait," I said. I placed my hand on the manila folder. "We're done with the employment part. Now we need to discuss the vendor relationship." Jared frowned. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder. Inside was the licensing agreement for the Quantum Ops Core platform, signed in 2018, renewed automatically every quarter. I spun it around so they could read it. "I don't work for you, Jared. I never really did. My company, Ironclad Logic, licenses the technology that runs your procurement, your logistics, and your vendor payments. I was just part of the package, on-site support included in the premium tier." Jared laughed. He actually laughed. He picked up the contract, glanced at the cover page, and tossed it back down. This is some old paperwork from the startup days. We own everything you wrote while you were here. Intellectual property assignment. It's standard. We own the code." "Actually," I said, tapping paragraph 4. "Read it. All code, architecture, and algorithms remain the sole property of the licensor, Ironclad Logic. The licensee, Quantum Ops Inc., is granted a non-exclusive, revocable right to use the software, contingent upon timely payment and adherence to usage guidelines." I watched his eyes scan the paragraph. I saw the moment the words hit his retinas, but his brain refused to process them. It was too absurd for him. In his world, developers were cogs. Companies owned everything. "This is bullshit," he spat. "You were on payroll. That voids this." "Check with legal," I said. "I was on a retainer. Taxed as a 1,099 contractor for the first 2 years, then moved to a W-2 structure for administrative convenience per a specific addendum signed by the founder. But the IP rights, those never transferred. Ironclad Logic still holds the copyright registration." I stood up. "Here's the situation, Jared. You just fired the on-site support. That's fine. I was tired of the coffee anyway. But you also missed the quarterly licensing payment. That's a breach. I'm not paying you a dime," Jared hissed, his face turning a shade of red that clashed with his vest. "Get out before I call the cops." "Okay," I said. I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at Brenda, whose mouth was hanging open. "Brenda, you might want to print out hard copies of the payroll data. Just a friendly tip." I looked at Jared one last time. "Clause 6, Jared. Look it up. Unauthorized use of the software following a breach of contract will result in immediate suspension of service. You have 72 hours to cure the breach. But since you just fired the only person who knows how to keep the engine running, I'd say you have less than that. Get out." Yelled, I walked out. I didn't look back. I walked past my old desk, past Tyler, who was aggressively typing nothing, past the break room. I walked out into the parking lot, the air thick and humid. I lit a cigarette, my first in 6 months, and inhaled deeply. It tasted like freedom. I got in my truck, a beat-up Ford F-150 that I trusted more than any human being, and tossed the manila folder on the passenger seat. Thought they fired an employee. They just evicted their landlord, and they didn't even have a spare key. I drove straight to the liquor store. Not the nice one with the wine-tasting station, but the one with bulletproof glass and a cashier named Sal who doesn't judge when you buy a handle of whiskey at 4:45 p.m. on a Friday. I bought a bottle of Old Crow. It tastes like gasoline and bad decisions, which felt appropriate for the occasion. Back at my apartment, one bedroom that smelled like Nag Champa and soldering iron, I set up my command center. I wasn't going to hack them. I didn't need to. Hacking is illegal. What I was doing was strictly administrative enforcement.